Welcome to Calvary Life. Hey, this is Paul Thompson. We're going to do something a little bit different today with our podcast. I want to introduce to you a candidate, a nominee for president of the Southern Baptist Convention that will be voted on this June. His name is Pastor Willy Rice. He's pastor of Calvary Baptist Church in Clearwater, Florida. I've had a few good conversations with him one-on-one in the last couple of months. I just want to say the more time I spend around Pastor Willy, the more I like him, and just really convinced that he is the man for our time right now as a convention, and just think he's a great candidate with just some great thoughts. And so what we're going to do today is we're actually going to borrow podcasts from sister church, Ridgecrest Baptist Church here in Dothan, on the same day that Pastor Willy came and spoke to a group of pastors here. They recorded a podcast and gave us permission to share a portion of that with you. And so that's what I want you to do. I want you to hear from him about renewal in the convention. If you want some more specific information about his plans, if he is elected, you can find them at baptistrenewal.us. There are 7 steps, 7 premises there, 7 pillars of renewal that Pastor Willy will share. And again, that's baptistrenewal.us. So I hope you give your attention to this, get a chance to get to know him in this interview and what he stands for. And I think this will be helpful for us as we move forward as a church, as a convention. And I think you'll be encouraged by it, but I hope it'll also encourage you to pray and support. And by the way, Calvary folks, if you're listening to this, we still have space for about 4 more messengers. We have an allotment of 12. We have 8 committed to going already. And if you'd like to join me and the rest of the group that's going as messengers of Calvary Baptist Church, this year's convention will be taking place at the Orange County Civic Center in Orlando, Florida. And so if you're interested in going, just contact the church office, let us know if you're a church member here at Calvary. If you're listening from another church, another Southern Baptist church particularly, I just want to strongly encourage you, if any way possible, participate in the convention. This is the only place where you can make your voice heard, where churches can speak up. The convention ought to be led by churches, just normal churches, and every size setting, and all sorts of towns and places. So it's not too late to get your church registered with some messengers to go. So I strongly want to encourage you to do that. So give your attention today to Pastor Willy Rice and his conversation with Pastor Ray Jones from Ridgecrest, and I think this will be really helpful for you.
I think to begin with, in the convention conversation, this podcast has a wide range of audience. So as pastors to a congregation or to just an audience in general, help the average person understand the Southern Baptist Convention as best as you can.
Go ahead, Mr. Soon-to-be President.
That's a great question, because Baptists are local church oriented. We believe churches are local gatherings of baptized believers. And yet every, church, at least in the Southern Baptist Convention, Baptist churches think, okay, there are things we could do together that are better than we could do alone. And so, through the years, what happened is Baptist churches organized themselves primarily around global missions. Because you need some infrastructure for missions. Mainly the Southern Baptist Convention became about sending missionaries and about educating the next generation of pastor leaders. So they started seminaries to train pastors, and they started mission boards to send missionaries. That's the real reason for cooperative work. It is not for a denomination to rule over us or to run us or to govern us, because they don't. And the beautiful thing about Baptist churches is it's also the very frustrating thing. It's a both and, is that they are autonomous and self-governing. The convention doesn't have authority over those churches. And that is something that people still get confused about. They don't understand our polity because many of our own people don't understand it. But we voluntarily associate so that we can send missionaries and we can educate the next generation of pastors. And it's other things have developed over time in terms of a publishing house and other things. But that's what the Southern Baptist Convention is. It's the cooperative work of all these Baptist churches, mainly to send missionaries internationally and plant churches nationally, and then seminaries, 6 seminaries around the country, which are some of the largest seminaries in the world. And by the way, our seminaries train people who are not Southern Baptists. So there's even a disproportionate impact on evangelicalism. I think I read somewhere where I shouldn't throw the statistic out with studying it, but something like 1 out of 3 or something of future pastors of all kinds are being trained in a Southern Baptist seminary. I'm not 100% sure on that statistic, but it's a high number. So it just reminds you that there is a ripple impact of what happens from the Southern Baptist Convention, even to people who may not consider themselves Southern Baptist.
It's referred to as a rope of sand. You don't hear that too much anymore, but it's meaning that it's voluntary. It's not like a bunch of cords that you can't break. It is a rope of sand. We voluntarily formed this rope together because we knew that we could be better together. So when large churches and small churches pool their resources, they can put more people out on the field, as Willy said, for missionary purposes, which is our origins. We can put more people out on the field, but we do it cooperatively. And I think to just echo what he said is one of the most important things that the world doesn't get about us, or even secular, or even other denominations, is that we're autonomous. We don't have to comply by the mandates of the convention. Now, there are doctrinal stipulations that we have to agree to, for sure. They can never tell us this is how much money you must give us. This is what you must adopt within the boundary, as long as it's not outside of the boundaries of like the Baptist faith and message, which is really our positional, doctrinal place.
So the first question that I have, I think, is going to tee you up nicely, or I hope at least, to the 7 points that you talked about today. So y'all correct me if I'm wrong when I say this, because I'm so young. I don't even remember. All I know about the conservative resurgence is what I've heard. But I think it might have been you telling me about this before, that the convention is the only institution, major institution at least, to start conservative, liberalize, and then have a conservative resurgence. And so do y'all see that happening again if it's liberalizing again? And then how do we reverse that and do that again? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'll jump into that. It's certainly an outlier when you look at mainline Protestant denominations in America to see one move back to its foundations. And that happened in the late part of the 20th century. I think that was a good movement. It doesn't mean there weren't times difficult parts of that, but it was a good movement to say we believe the Bible, and there was an effort to kind of reclaim our institutions to make sure they are doctrinally grounded, and it was largely successful. In the late 1960s, the United Methodist Church and the Southern Baptist Convention were the same size. If you go back to about 1968, I'm doing this off my head, the SBC and the United Methodist Church are basically the same size. That's been now 60 years, 64 years, something like that. And the United Methodist Church is about half the size of the Southern Baptist Convention. It's hemorrhaged greatly, and it's hemorrhaging rapidly. The Southern Baptist Convention is a little bit larger. It grew larger and now has come a little bit smaller, at least by membership, but it is still more than, I think, twice the size of the United Methodist Church. So whereas other denominations went radically to the left and apostatized, the Southern Baptist Convention was able to reassert its convictional boundaries. I don't think we're facing the exact same scenario. It's not like it is similar but different. In the 1970s, what you had was what we called liberalism by means of rationalism, intellectualism. It was a denial, for instance, of the accuracy of the Bible, a denial of the miracles. You had situations where you had seminary professors that were not orthodox in their teaching. So I argue it came through intellectualism and rationalism, and you drift in that direction. I really think the challenge of today is I don't think you would find many people teaching in our seminaries and that are not orthodox. Maybe, but I don't know that you would have many examples. Certainly not like we had. We had people denying, Paul wrote this book and the creation is real and so forth, or that the creation account is, authoritative. I don't think you have that. But I do think what we've seen in the last 20 years is an erosion due to pragmatism and an appeal to try to be everything to everybody that has kind of weakened our distinctives and weakened our convictional moorings. I like to describe it as, and the word woke is overused, and I understand it can be used in a kind of pejorative, almost, irresponsible way. Everything's woke. This is woke. But I do think there's something to that woke ideology. And I think what we experienced in the 2010s was a woke riptide in the culture. And it pulled the culture in a very clear direction. And I think the SBC was weakened by pragmatism. And so all of a sudden you felt you started feeling something that didn't sound right, feeling that some leaders weren't articulating what our people really felt and believed. And so you started feeling us pulled in a certain direction. So I don't know that it's the same thing, but like the conservative resurgence, I do think we need a moment where we hear from the grassroots again. I do think we need a moment where churches step up again to the plate and say to our entities and our organizations, we love you, we value you, we are not trying to burn this to the ground. We love this institutional expression, but we need to make sure it's accountable to local church pastors and local church leaders. I think that's the challenge that we're facing right now.
Yeah, agreed fully. I can't say it any better.
Why president?
Why president? Well, the president affects some things and has an opportunity to affect change in the Southern Baptist Convention. He does not have all kind of power. I mean, it's not like you can wave a magic wand and change everybody's attitude and police the internet or anything like that. No such thing as
executive orders.
Yes.
in this one.
Oh, you could give them, but it's just, it'll be fun to give them, but that'll be it. But the president does have an opportunity to change some direction. First of all, you have some constitutional powers in terms of the committees that you appoint. And I won't bore everyone with that, but you appoint committees that through a process, eventually it's several steps, can affect who sits on the boards of our SBC entities. So you need to be intentional about that and have really good, solid, convictional people there. And so you have an impact there. You oversee the meeting. And there are other, smaller duties. But I've always felt like the greatest opportunity of leadership is influence. It's not what's written in the Constitution. It's what, Teddy Roosevelt called the bully pulpit. It's the opportunity to speak. It's the opportunity to put some pressure where it needs to be applied, or to shine a light where it needs to be shown, or to cast, to speak where you need to speak. And that's not going to be written in some constitutional duty. But the great leaders, I'm not suggesting I could be one of those, but you obviously aspire to effectiveness. But the great leaders that we have had, Ray, that you and I would talk about, the Charles Stanleys, Adrian Rogers, and the like, who affected the conservative resurgence, they were men who used their voice. It wasn't just their appointments or how they ruled at the convention. It was the influence that they were able to bring to bear on the situation. So it seems like that's an opportunity that maybe I could play. God knows. We'll see. It's up to him. But at least felt like we should try.
And part of those guys that you and I kind of lived through that resurgence. We walked through that, which were interesting. That's a subject of a completely different podcast. But part of their influence was the result of their pulpits.
Right.
They were strong, powerful, godly, convictional men in the pulpit, which gave them influence, which made their influence in the convention, on the convention level, so much more powerful. But I will say that, and I think you'd agree with this, Southern Baptists, by and large, they listen to the man up top, the president guy. They listen to who that president is. And so that's why between appointive powers and communication abilities, that's why this position is so important to Southern Baptists. And so convictional positions are vital, just like in any other leadership role of any other entity or organization. And so that's where the influence comes. And that's why we want people that we say we have confidence both theologically in them and in a practical sense of their ability to put the pieces together and form a cohesive kind of direction. And so I think that's why this is, and that's why I'm glad that Willy is running.
When you think about those leaders that you mentioned, and I really enjoyed the way you handled, the difficulty of the politics of the president conversation that you're having to have right now, and really enjoyed how you talked about that down there as far as not elevating somebody or tearing somebody down type of mindset. But what was different about those leaders that you just mentioned than maybe some of leadership or recently or days leaders today? What was different about those men compared to leaders today?
Well, I don't want to certainly disparage our leaders today. Like Clint Presley has been the president the last 2 years. I think Clint's done a very good job. Clint's a friend of mine. I think Clint's been a really good leader these last 2 years. He's been kind of a calming influence, a stable influence, and is a strong person. I really like Clint and grateful for his job. So I don't want to disparage leaders. I do think that there have been some challenges over the recent past, and I think some things got off track. I think there were some mistakes that have been made that I think could have been handled better at the top. And it's not just the president, it's a lot of things. And so I do think leadership matters. I will just say the best leaders are guys who are convictional, and you have to, one of the conversations, for instance, that's going around right now is about trusting the messengers. That's kind of been a line. Well, we trust the messengers. We trust the messengers. Well, I trust the messengers. Okay. If you mean by that, I think most of the time the messengers will get it right eventually. I'll say that. But if you think they get it right all the time, I would disagree with that. And usually when we get it wrong on the floor, it's because the platform or the leadership, not just the president, but the people guiding those things, have not guided it well, or made sure the messengers had all the right information or all the opportunity to get that information, or even the adequate opportunity to debate things when they come up. And when messengers get steered in a wrong direction, they sometimes make decisions out of emotion or off of partial information that can be bad decisions, that can actually have bad outcomes. So I do trust the messengers, but I trust, just like in our churches, just like in our families, in the convention, we need to make sure leaders are taking care of the messengers to make sure they have the best information and they have an adequate opportunity to process the information that they're being given. There will always be people with an agenda to co-opt and to move the convention in one direction or another. And sometimes they're well-meaning, but leaders have to make sure the messengers get the right information so they can make the right. I think if they get the right information and they have the right process, they tend to get it right. So I trust them, but I also think they need to be guided and led well.
Yeah, and I would just say to your question about what made these leaders, I'm like Willy. I don't disparage any of those that we've had good leaders for a great deal of my life. We've had good leaders, or at least my ministry life, including Clint, who is also a friend and has done, and I think has done a good job of calming some tensions. But I think those kind of guys that we at least looked up to as great leaders, their greatness was essentially found in they were great communicators. And you used a term earlier in our luncheon about clarification. And I think probably those are two sides of the same coin, but they were great communicators. And so people got what they were saying. And I think that's what kind of gave them the legacy, but also don't underestimate the hour in which they led helped. I think that was part of it. They were godly men, as I said. They were convictional men. They were great communicators, and they clarified in the hour what needed to be clarified. And I think that was what made them so powerful.
Yeah, I think the man has to match the moment. And, Abraham Lincoln was who he was because the man and the moment. There are things happening around you that no person can control. But it's important to understand the moment and the voice in the moment that is needed. And, we look at those generational leaders partly because of the moment that they lived in.
That's right.
They were the right voice in the right moment. We don't know what's going to be the moment in the next 5 years. None of us do. But, we need convictional clarity. That's what we need.
All right. So speaking of convictional clarity, I want to list off the 7, I don't know, would you call them talking points or priorities?
Yeah, I call them 7 pillars of a Baptist renewal. That's what I've been
that's a better term. So we have convictional clarity, denominational accountability, missional integrity, cultural responsibility, biblical unity, global intentionality, and spiritual vitality. So could you tell us a little bit about those? I don't know if you want to give everything you gave at the luncheon, but just kind of how you came to those kind of 7 pillars and why you think they're important.
Yeah, and as you said, just for time's sake, probably not good to walk through all of those in the same depth. And they're not really listed in the area of importance. Some ways, the last one is the most important because spiritual vitality is this call for awakening and humbling ourselves and seeking God. If God doesn't show up and bless and move, then there's no. It's not like Southern Baptists need. What we really need is another program. What we need is a new logo. If we could just come up with that, we need a fresh move of the Lord. Yeah. And we know that. So I kind of saved the best for last or the biggest for last. But I also put first some of the hot button issues like convictional clarity. There have been conversations about women pastors that have kind of plagued us. I kind of feel like it's almost paralyzed us. Like none of us signed up to have that debate year after year after year. And Baptist people have been pretty clear, whether people think we're right or wrong, we've been pretty clear about what we believe in the office of pastor, elder, overseer. But there's been some confusion and there's been some clumsiness as to how we've dealt with that issue. Denominational accountability is that idea that is not meant to be a shot across the bow to anyone. And this one might be the hardest and the stickiest, but it's just this idea that Baptists work best when we're led by local churches and pastors, not by entities and executives. And I'm not an enemy of our entities, and I'm a friend of many of our executives. But I think when the Southern Baptist Convention is healthiest, the local churches are the ones raising their voice, and the local churches are the priority. In a Baptist life, what I've learned is everybody says that, but we all drift away from that. It's just almost human nature in institutions to drift away from that. So I think we're at a moment where local churches need to just kind of say, okay, let's hit a reset. We're not against anybody. We're not trying to burn the thing down, but we just need to remind everybody, local churches are the boss here. You work for us, not the other way around. Right. And I sense there's a real undertow about that. So other things like missional integrity, having the right mission, our voice to the culture, what biblical unity really is and the founding, those are other things that we put in there. And we have a little website, baptistrenewal.us, that people, if they want to learn more, they can access. We have some podcasts on there. Who knows, maybe we'll put a link to this one. But we have some podcasts that are on there that people can access if they want us to unpack some of those a little bit more. And maybe my favorite is global intentionality. I would love to see Southern Baptists called back to a kind of generational goal in that it recognizes the upcoming 2000th year anniversary of the giving of the Great Commission. We don't know the date, of course. We really, people argue about that. But a lot of people, maybe a consensus would say 2033, somewhere around there, we're going to celebrate 2,000 years of the giving of the Great Commission, as well as the death, burial, and resurrection of our Savior. And I just feel like, and there's some Christians around the world that are already talking about this. I don't hear us talking about it yet, but there are international Christians talking about this. And I think we ought to talk about it. I think we ought to set a generational, historic goal of what are Southern Baptists going to do to see the Great Commission fulfilled. And only God knows when it's fulfilled. So that's kind of grandiose language. But what would we do in our time to see the Great Commission fulfilled in our nation and in our world? I think that's the kind of thing that could pull us together again and get us back on offense, get us back to the thing that really unites us. So I'd love to have some conversations about that sort of thing that I think would inspire our people and move us in the right direction.
Yeah, agreed. It was the point at which we organized to start with. And maybe if there's been denominational drift in recent years, that may be the most glaring place where we've drifted. I saw, though, last week, I was encouraged by something, and that is for the first time in over a decade in Southern Baptist life, the numbers trended up this past year.
Yeah, baptisms are up and weekly attendance is up. Membership is down, but membership is probably the least reliable number in Baptist life.
Sure.
And we have all known that for a long time.
Yeah.
It just is, you know, we can unpack that another time. It's the least reliable number. Attendance, giving, baptisms, those are some of the reliable indicators. I haven't looked at the giving numbers yet from the last year, but the baptism is trending up and attendance is, that's very good. And I appreciate you saying that, Ray, because what I'm not implying, I don't want anyone to hear me saying we are not doing Great Commission work. Actually, we are. And I'm grateful for it. Calvary has been involved in that. I know your church here at Ridgecrest. I was just talking to a lady whose daughter is serving in the journeyman program with our IMB. We've sent 24 missionaries in the last 10 years. We've planted churches. And I'm grateful for our church planting, our missionary sending. I celebrate that work. I am in no way gloom and doom and let's be negative. We've got a lot of things to celebrate. But I do think it's been a while since that was the thing Southern Baptists were talking about the most. And we just been pulled in a lot of other, and you know what? Sometimes you have to be, and sometimes there are problems that have to be fixed. We've had some, we got to deal with them. But that's the thing we want to do, is take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And I would love to see some kind of strategy, some kind of goal, some kind of target that pulls us together and unites us again around seeing the Great Commission fulfilled in our time.
Your number 3, missional integrity. We've talked a lot on this podcast in some ways about this idea of substance over size, or not the exact wording, but integrity over celebrity, and how easy it is as a follower of Jesus in 2026 to see social media, to see these pastors, celebrity pastors, come out and say certain things and just kind of jump on the bandwagon of different kind of things that are happening in the church. Just speak in your mind towards the convention, but also to just the everyday follower of Christ, of the importance over that idea of missional integrity.
Yeah, it's very important to me. I've been thinking about it a long time, and I am a terrible salesman, actually. But I actually have just written a book that's available on Amazon and called The Show. And it's all about how an obsession with growth has corrupted our movement. And it's just a very simple book, and it's written with church leaders in mind. And it's just out, actually. And but it's all about that. It's about how I think in the church growth culture, which was well intended. And Ray, you and I have grown up in that. We've done our ministry in that. Those were the role models. It was, I like to say, for Baptist kids, it was in our mother's milk. Like, we were weaned on it. Winning meant you're bigger this year than you were last year. And everyone wants their church to grow. I'd worry about somebody who didn't. But I think in that growth movement have come some serious compromises and some serious fault lines that we need to go back and re-examine. Yes, we want to grow, but health and growth are not the same thing. And in the book, I talk about Simon Magus, who Simon the magician, he's often called in Acts 8, who saw the power of the gospel and he saw the power of the Holy Spirit and he wanted it. He tried to buy it, actually. He saw what Peter and John could do, and he was a magician. He was a sorcerer. So he was he was a spiritualist, but he was also a showman. Like, he drew crowds. And he said, I want that power. What's it cost? And of course, Peter had some pretty strong reproof for him. And it was actually very strong words for him. And but I've seen in that temptation something that you see even in the church growth movement. How do I replicate models? How do I replicate methods? And the motivation, if we're not careful, we say it's about evangelism, but it really becomes about vocational success.
Mm-hmm.
It really becomes about my platform. It really becomes about my kingdom and not God's kingdom. And that is very subtle, but it is very dangerous. And so that's what we've tried to write about. But I'm so grateful that you brought up that point. I don't know that a president can do anything. Maybe one of those executive orders you talked about earlier, Ray, which means nothing. But I do think you can use your voice to say, we need healthy biblical models. It's not about building personal brands and personal platform and celebrity. We've tried that. It didn't work. It's not working. We need healthy models, healthy shepherds, and healthy mission.
Yeah. And there, an interesting thing about health is a church grows. It may not always numerically grow, but health grows a church because it builds depth in that church. And I love what you say. I look forward to reading your book. I love what you said about the show idea, that we did grow up in that culture. And you and I grew up in a culture as pastors that for so many years that if you didn't beat last year's numbers, you were failing.
Yep.
And I remember when
you felt like a failure.
And you felt like a failure because that's how everything was measured. And I'm glad to see that some of that is going away, but there's still this idea of showmanship. You talked about Simon the magician, this showmanship idea, and how can we outdo? And the problem with that is, once you start a circus, you got to maintain a circus. and that's not to say people's intentions are bad. That's not what I mean. That if a pastor has a lot of entertainment value, I mean that means that his motive is malicious. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying there's much of that has taken us aside from our mission in an attempt. We've been told to fulfill the mission. Yep. This is how you fulfill the mission, which is not necessarily true. I had a young man, a pastor, a few years ago say, "I want you to mentor me. Would you mentor me?" And you and I both have done that with a number of guys, and I love that. Because that's an investment. I feel like that's the kind of investment you're making that goes the rest of their life and even after your life. So it's a multiplier. But he said this to me after a few weeks. We met weekly and for lunch, and I would tell him to bring 3 questions, and these guys are well versed in that because we've done that very thing. But this young, after a while, he told me this. He said, I really don't need what we're spending time on. I was spending time with him on building a missional minded church, doing missions and reaching the world and everything. And after about 2 months of this, he said, "You know what?" He said, "I appreciate that." But he said, "I've got all that figured out." He said, "What I need you to mentor me in is how to be a CEO of a large church." And that whole idea of building it large. And then he said, and running a large staff. And I simply told him, I said, "Well, I need to be honest with you. If that's what you need mentoring in, I'm not your man." I said, "There are plenty of books at Barnes & Noble. You can go down that'll tell you how to do those kinds of things." I said, "I can help you think about ministry," which is back to what you're talking about. Ministry builds health, but we have, I think, confused sometimes that health and growth or numbers, right, which makes a guy in a small church feel like my whole ministry's been a waste.
We've got to have a better system than 10% of the pastors feel like winners and 90% feel like losers. Yeah. And I'm glad you said that about executives, because one of the things I got in my research out of that is this idea of pastors are called to be shepherds. And that's what Peter, by the way, he's the guy that, showed down Simon Magus. And according to church history, they had a rivalry that continued, by the way, extended all the way to Rome. And we write about that in the book. But it's Peter who later wrote in 1 Peter 5, "Shepherd the flock over which God has called you overseers." And the metaphor of shepherd is very intentional. You're not called to be executives. We're not called to be life coaches. We're not called to be communicators. All those things may have a play in it. But the word shepherd, that metaphor is intentional. It's deliberate. They had army leaders and politicians, and they had other leaders. Jesus specifically used that metaphor with Peter because there's something about shepherding. It goes to the character of the person. It goes to the motivation of the person to care for the flock. And I think one of the things is we have a lot of pastors who want to be celebrities and executives, and they've lost the calling to be shepherds. And I think we need to reclaim that idea of being a shepherd.
The only convention that I've ever had a chance to attend, I don't know if you remember this, 2019, it was in Birmingham. I think I had literally just a couple weeks before come on staff. So, I mean, I'm as young in ministry as you can get. And that's my first convention that I got to attend. Like I said,
That's the one where I didn't know how to do the bro hug. Is that?
Yeah. Are you friends with Robbie Gallaty?
I do know Robbie. Yes. Yeah.
Well, this is a story worth telling.
Okay. They know each other pretty well now too. Do you want to tell it or do you want me to tell it?
You go right ahead.
Let the record show. He brought it up.
It was the most entertaining part of the entire convention for Broxton. And who else was there?
Jonathan was there.
Yeah. Jonathan, maybe Chuck.
Chuck was there, yeah.
Okay.
So we're in the big convention hall.
And Robbie's like, for those that don't know, I mean, he's
he's a massive guy.
Massive guy. Buff,
I mean,
whatever they say.
Just picture,
weightlifter.
Picture the bookcase.
Yeah, he's massive.
That's Robbie Gallaty. So anyway, we're in the convention hall, and had y'all met before?
Yes, we have.
So they were catching up, and they go in. Robbie goes in for the kind of bro hug type deal. He went in for the handshake.
Oh yeah,
and it's the awkward moment, like a fist bump and a handshake. And that just played out, and then they didn't know how to close it out.
It was awkward.
Yeah.
And Robbie didn't know what to do, and I didn't know how to. And we were kind of. It was.
So then they just kind of walked away.
It was kind of uncomfortable dance. Well, hey, see you, bro.
And your staff wouldn't let you forget.
And they had to be there to see it.
Of course,
they're the only ones that saw it.
Well,
I think in the convention hall, and it was the highlight of the convention. What does that tell you about my staff?
Yeah.
That's the highlight. You know, as the scripture says, Jacob leaned on his staff and died.
You know how many times we've heard that?
Well, you see what kind of staff I'm dealing with.
He just talked about being a shepherd.
It was so good that we really considered calling the convention hall and seeing if we could just pull the security footage because we needed people to see it. But anyway, so I had a serious point about the 2019
We'll make an
convention.
executive order about that sort of thing.
Yeah.
If you need to. Yeah.
So in 2019, I'm extremely young in ministry. And let the record show I'm in a leadership role doing media ministry, but I'm not in a pastoral type role. So take that into consideration too. But I didn't know a lot about ministry. I didn't know a lot about the world, period. I guess I was 23 years old. And I definitely didn't know a lot about SBC life. Even growing up here at Ridgecrest in a Southern Baptist church, I didn't know that all this went on. So all I knew about what happened at the convention, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way towards anyone, but basically was what I saw play out online, basically on Twitter with all the different personalities. And I remember kind of just leaving that convention, just being a little bit disillusioned, frustrated, just kind of wondering, if I can go back to Ridgecrest and we're going to do our thing locally and nationally and then across the world as well. But basically, what's the point of, not of the Great Commission, but what is the point of being involved with the convention? So I don't want to speak for a lot of other people, but I'm willing to bet that there are younger guys in the ministry that see a lot of that and see, kind of have the same questions. And not to go down this road, but I will give just a little bit about, my spiritual frustration that we've talked about on the podcast. Some has had a lot to do with, and I'll just confess, it's allowing a lot of that stuff that goes on online to affect me spiritually. And I think Chase, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think I'm in a better place with that. I deactivated my Twitter account a couple weeks ago. So, I mean, I'm not going to know what goes on at the convention at least on Twitter, but I do think that has affected me spiritually in my life. And so what would you say to the younger guys, or not even if you're not in ministry, if you're listening or watching the journey this week and you find yourself being in a position to say, my church is going to do the Great Commission? Why do I need the convention? Does that make sense? And that's for both of y'all, I think.
Well, if the question is why the convention, that's a very good question. And I think the simple answer is this, over 3,000 missionaries, I think we started, I don't know the number at the top of my head, but it's north of 700 churches, I think, last year through the Send North American Network. And a lot of very good things, a lot of, thousands of seminary students. Those are real things. That's not, that's not just a number in the air. It's a real thing. Again, I heard about one of the young people from this church who's serving somewhere, right? Called out from you may have others. That's a real thing, that there's support, that there's infrastructure, that there's training. And whenever you deal with institutional life, there are frustrations. Institutions are full of people, which means they're inevitably going to fail. They're going to be imperfect. But institutional expressions of movements are inevitable if those movements succeed. If you have a movement without an institution, it tends to fade in a generation. You can't hand anything off. It's a wonderful move, but you never built anything that you can hand off. Institutions are built to hand to the next generation and the generation after that. It's something you want to give to your grandchildren. But yet the problem with institutions is they tend to drift toward maintenance and self-preservation, which inevitably causes them sometimes to make mistakes because they reflexively are defensive. And it requires energy and effort to keep them focused on the mission. What you don't want to do is allow naive idealism to say, well, let's just walk away from all that and start over. I've seen church planners do this in the past. And I don't hear it as much anymore, but for a generation, about 20 years ago, you heard all these church planners. I'm going to go show them how to do it. You hear these young guys. I'm going to go show them how to do it. That, Ridgecrest, you got all these buildings. I'm going to go show them what a church in the book of Acts looks like. Mm-hmm. And you go, okay, brother, go knock you. I'm praying for you. And then in about, 18 months, they called you and go, hey, do you have a building we might could find or something, And here's what you find. You can go and do that, which is great. We want people who are idealistic and starting new things. But human nature is what human nature is. You're going to be dealing with the same problems 20 and 30 years from now. And if you start institutions, guess what? 50 years from now and 100 years from now, you're going to be dealing with some of the same issues. So either we build institutions and then walk away from them because they're imperfect, or we build institutions and we make sure they stay on mission so that we can give them to another generation. That's what I would say about the Southern Baptist Convention. There's enough invested that we ought to preserve it and make sure it is missionally effective so we can pass it to another generation and another generation. Right now in Uganda, for instance, there is somewhere around a 30-year-old woman. I don't know how old she is. She's from our church. Her name is Shannon. She's serving among a group of people around the world. You don't know her. You don't know anything about that country, probably. You probably don't know anything about where she's at. But she's serving there, ministering, evangelizing among some of the poorest of the poor in the world. And I'm telling you, this is a young woman who is full of the Holy Spirit and full of God. I wish everyone knew her story. And we have others like it. You're a part of that. I'm a part of that. We're a part of that because we have collaborated. And you can walk away and say, nah, I'm walking away. I'm starting over. And that's what gets lost. That's what gets lost. So I'm grateful that I'm part of a movement that can help things like that happen. But we need to understand it doesn't run on autopilot. It takes young people, new generations leaning in, fixing the problems so we can hand it off in a healthy way.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with that. And I go back to the whole idea of the missions thing. And it is kind of funny that we come back to the missions thing, but then it really is the norm because that's, again, where we were born. We were born for that purpose. This summer, our guy who oversees missions for us told me that we will have people serving on 5 continents. This church affiliated through SBC Life. And I remember, I think of one young lady that is serving And she came to me a few years ago, and she was in a Christian college, but she knew God had called her to the mission field, but she was trying to figure out how to get there. And so she wanted to talk to me about different organizations, not bad organizations, but different organizations that might be the route that she gets to the mission field. I said, have you considered our own Southern Baptist Convention? She said, what can I do? And I began to explain to her, and then I connected her with some people. And now she is a Southern Baptist missionary, and if you ask her about it, ask her about the difference. And I explained to her, I said, here's the benefits of going with your own church denomination. You won't be raising money. Yeah. I said, there's infrastructure that'll protect you on the field. And by the way, she needed it not too long ago. There's infrastructure there and all, and that's this collaboration that we've come together. It's one of those often unseen benefits of our ability to put people on the mission field. And I've had the same experience as you have with church planners who've come to me. God has called me to plant a church, but we're going to do the New Testament model, and we're going to do our church is going to do house church and house churches. Yeah. And I said, go get them. I said, very convicted. They knew exactly what God wanted them to do. And I'm not against house churches and everything, but I always ended the conversation on several occasions with these guys by saying, but you do know in good time, they built buildings. You do know they built buildings. I said, in the first and second century, we have the ruins of church buildings where when they could, they did. And so the advantages of what we offer as who we are, sometimes I think gets overshadowed by the things that we say, well, I don't need that. We can just do that on our own. And there's some truth to that, For example, you're a big church. We're a big church. Our associational director knows, because I've told him, we don't actually have to have that association for us to do what we do. But we're one of the major givers to that. And that's not said with any kind of arrogance. Don't mean that. But why do we do that? It's not because if we don't have them, we can't function. But there are a lot of places out there that don't have the resources.
You want to help others.
And so it's an investment that God has enabled us to make. So we're investing. That, I think, is one of the things that maybe we just haven't done a great job, when we communicate. So why do we need each other? Well, because we multiply our energy and our strength.
And I think one of the things we have not done well in the recent past is educate a rising generation of what we're doing. And I will say one more thing about X, and social media. The Southern Baptist Convention does not exist on X. There are, I don't know, a couple hundred people on there maybe, and there's, a couple dozen people on there. And, there's some important debates that take place on there. I'm not disparaging that. It's like a speaker's corner at a college. You're going to go and hear debates. If you don't want to hear debates, don't go on it. And sometimes they're sharp, and sometimes I don't like them. Sometimes they're too sharp. I don't like doing that. That's just not my style. Other people are better at it. But I do sometimes get information there, and I've learned to sift through that information. But at times it does get acrimonious, and I wish it didn't. I'm trying, not to do that. I'd like to set a good example. And I just think don't let that negativism overwhelm you, because there's so much that is happening and worth investing in.
Yeah, that's good. Chase?
I was just going to say, is there anything else that you want to add or ask? I don't have anything else on mine.
No, I think we've covered a whole bunch of ground. In fact, we've covered more ground than I thought we would cover, to be honest. But thank you guys for putting this together, and thank you, Willie, for giving up time to be up here with us and addressing. And I like the nature of this kind of discussion, because there are a lot of people out there that won't have this luxury to be able to say, just what does he think as he goes forward in this? And again, as you've said, we'll see what the Lord has to say. The Bible says that the lot is cast by man, but the outcome is determined by the Lord. And I'm hoping for the outcome that we all want, and we'll be praying to that end. But thanks, guys, for allowing us to have this kind of
thank
discussion.
you, and thank you, Ray, first of all, for your friendship for many, many years, your great leadership in this the Wiregrass area, here in Dothan. This is a regional church and has made a huge impact, and I'm so grateful for you. And this is one of those areas I really do trust the messengers at the end of the day. It's like they'll choose, and we will trust that, and we'll be okay. But, using this opportunity to use our voice, thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about things. People that want to learn more, BaptistRenewal.us is a website they can check out. And the book is The Show on, I think they could just go on Amazon. I don't, people know how to do that. But we appreciate their prayers and the support of so many people. And we hope to see a lot of Southern Baptists in Orlando. Come to Florida. We look forward to seeing you.